All right, so now I wanted to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court decision, which is very, very surprising to a lot of people. So this is an NPR. They say Supreme Court unexpectedly upholds provision prohibiting racial gerrymandering. The U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday stepped back from the brink of totally gutting the landmark 1965 Voting Rights Act by a 5-4 vote. A coalition of conservative and liberal justices reaffirmed the court's 1986 precedent, interpreting how legislative districts must be drawn under the landmark Voting Rights Act as amended in 1982. The court said that in Alabama, a state where there are 7 congressional seats and one in 4 voters is black, the Republican-dominated state legislature had denied African-American voters a reasonable chance to elect a second representative of their choice. The decision could reverberate across other states with reconsideration of how congressional lines are drawn in areas with significant black population. So, remember, there was a decision from a few years back.
Right.
That basically gutted the Voting Rights Act. And I remember one of the lines from one of the justices who was on the majority side was like, is it the contention of the lawyers that the South is more racist than the North? And they said it almost like, well, obviously they're not. Like, that was the implication.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that thinking, of course they are.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a long, ugly history. That's a reason why there's, additional scrutiny applied to some of these states as well.
Well, now it looks like, almost like some of them were like, okay, yeah, we did the test, and they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It looks like they were like, oh, okay, we gave you the chance, and you didn't do the right thing.
I mean, I read it in a slightly more political way, which is that this is Chief Justice Roberts reportedly is very aware of the political standing of the court.
That it's, yeah.
And this court has took a huge hit.
Reputational hit.
After overturning Roe versus Wade. If you just look at like trust in institutions, already trust of the Supreme Court, in my opinion, justifiably so, was already quite low. And after Dobbs, it plummets even further.
Oh, yeah.
So I sort of see this
He's trying to
as
maintain the credibility of the court.
Reestablish the credibility of like, see, it's not just all partisan. Like, here we are calling balls and strikes and doing something that you liberals want as well. I mean, and it's not just liberals, like the Voting Rights Act and not discriminating on a racial basis is broadly popular with the American public. So that's more what I read into it. I read all of their decisions as just sort
political.
of like nakedly political.
They're absolutely political. Yeah. But I think some of them are genuine ideologues.
Yeah.
So let me just point out for everybody, to your point, Chief Justice John Roberts was on the majority side of this opinion. So he went more with the liberals than he did with the conservatives.
Yeah.
And Brett Kavanaugh did that.
I feel like Kavanaugh has joined with liberals on a couple of other decisions, although
I can't remember any other.
I can't pull him up at the top of my mind, but I feel like he may have taken one or two other surprising decisions.
I will say, though, remember during the abortion case, when it leaked early that they're going to slap down Roe versus Wade, there was also reporting that John Roberts, behind the scenes, was trying desperately to argue with other conservative justices, basically saying, look, we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't need to totally get rid of Roe versus Wade. We could update it in a sense. There was that case, I think it was Casey, the case that was, they changed the standard from the trimester standard to the viability standard. Basically what Roberts was arguing was, no, keep the right to an abortion, but just tighten the standard a little bit more. So make it so it's still a right, but it's a right within the first, say, 10 weeks or whatever, or 12 weeks, as opposed to 20 weeks, which is roughly where it was with the fetal viability standard. So he was saying he understood the political implications, to your point, back then with Dobbs, where he was like, if we totally slap down Roe versus Wade, we're really skating on thin ice here. And so to your point, that could have led to him now to be like, nope, we're not going to go through this again.
Yeah.
You're going to have a court with an approval rating of like 8% in due time.
Yeah, and then you could really, actually face, okay, are we having court packing? Are we, God forbid, subject to a code of ethics like every other federal court in the country?
If it wasn't Joe Biden, these people would be afraid, right? Abraham Lincoln bucked the Supreme Court. FDR bucked the Supreme Court. A Democratic president who's worth anything is going to be like, oh, you don't like what I did here? How about you stop me with your army?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. You don't have an army. I do. And so we're going to go ahead and do this. There are times throughout history where they've ignored the court. The court has gotten it wrong a number of times. Plessy versus Ferguson, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like when they're wrong, it's not, oh, they're the supreme law of the land. That's the end of the conversation. No. It's even questionable whether or not you have the right to judicial review. Why do you get to be the ones who determine what is and isn't constitutional? The elected body of representatives who the American people picked should probably be the ones who get the final say, because at least they're representing the people.
Yeah, well, they gave themselves that power through their
Correct.
own, through Marbury versus Madison.
Yes, and at a certain point it becomes judicial tyranny, where they're brazenly disregarding the plain-faced reading of the Constitution for their own political ends.
Yeah. I mean, we clearly have, like, judicial supremacy, which is not the way that this was intended. We're supposed to have 3 co-equal branches. But, so yeah, that's the vein that I read this in, is them trying to claw back some bit of credibility because, yeah, is Joe Biden going to move against them? Very unlikely, right? This man is an institutionalist through and through, wouldn't do the 14th Amendment for the dead, whatever. There's a million examples. But Joe Biden ain't going to be president forever.
That's
you know,
right.
I mean, either he loses re-election, then you have a Republican, in which case you're safe for a while. But then if it's Trump, he can only be in office for 4 years, and then you've got the gates wide open. And if you really have a revolt against the court on the liberal side, that could easily become a litmus test issue in a Democratic primary. I could see that without a lot of doubt, especially if you just completely obliterated something like the Voting Rights Act on top of having already completely obliterated Roe versus Wade. So he's keenly aware that they are skating on dangerous political thin ice.
Yeah, and they got it right. Wonderful. Should have been 8-0.
Yeah.
Should have been 8-0. Wait, 9.
Yeah.
9. Sorry, I can't count.
It's okay, babe.
All right.
Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.